How is it better? Okay. Well, we're talking about this cool poem by Emily Dickinson, even in case anyone didn't hear me. But it's about revenge. The palate of hate departs. As soon as you get revenge on your enemy, the sad thing is the story is over. So the best policy, she says, this is the way of humans, anger as soon as fed is dead. But if you want it to be strong and healthy, you starve it. You don't satisfy it. So starving is what makes your anger fat. And when your anger is fat enough, that's when you use it to get vengeance on your enemy. So it's a really powerful poem, really insightful into human nature, human condition. This is something we all know and understand about ourselves. Anger, revenge, the need for justice, enemies. This is something common to all of us as humans. Even the nicest among us, we might have enemies from time to time. Thanks, PJ. We can be done with that. And Jesus has some things to say about that. Jesus knows the function of enemy in humanity. And if you really reflect on it, the concept of enemy is really important to life. We need enemies. Enemies are important to our society, to our community. That's how we use them, right? What unites people more faster than a common enemy? When we have an enemy, that means we ought to automatically rally around and against that entity, that enemy. Enemies are important. They help us make sense of reality. It's much easier to say the bad that we're experiencing or is caused by an outside force, an enemy, rather than to say it's just random, chaotic pain and struggle and suffering that we experience from time to time. So enemies have an important function. Jesus knows that. He doesn't tell us to not have enemies. He goes beyond that. He says, I know you have enemies. We all do. But here's what you do when you have them. And I think the secret goal here with Jesus is that when you do these things, you will find it's hard to maintain an enemy as such, and they might turn into something else. Who are these enemies of Jesus' day? Who might they have in mind? Well, there is obviously the personal, the person that is your enemy at work, or a family member, or the neighbor who, you have different philosophies about lawn care and that sort of thing. Well, we have enemies. I can make an enemy in 20 seconds driving out on this road. You guys know my harsh criticism of other people and their driving, so it's real easy to find enemies. But there's also other enemies. Who are the enemies Jesus has in mind? I don't do politics, but sometimes Jesus does. And I think some of this is a little political, social in Jesus' context. You know that there is Roman occupation here, and it hit Jesus and his disciples personally, particularly in the fishing industry, where Rome gets all the money and they get hardly anything from their own work and toil and efforts. Caesar owns the lake, and he owns the fish in the lake, and he gets all that. You just work for scraps and pennies as a fisherman, and you give all the good stuff to him, and maybe you'll come away with just enough to survive, if you're lucky. You're poor. A disciple is. Jesus' disciples are. You're hungry. These people of this land know what it means to weep. They know what it means to be hated. Not necessarily for religious reasons, but maybe so. And Jesus in verse 20 turns his gaze towards his disciples and he began to say, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, you shall be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, ostracize you, insult you, scorn your name as evil, for the sake of the Son of Man. Be glad in that day and leap for joy. For behold, your reward is great in heaven, for in the same way their fathers used to treat the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you are receiving your comfort in full. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you shall be hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for their fathers used to treat the false prophets the same way. But I say to you who hear," if you're really listening, "I say to you, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you." Now we see why it's such a difficult text. How many of us understand exactly what Jesus is saying here to do? I think most of us. And how many of us do exactly what Jesus is telling us to do here? I think it's clear what he's saying, but we can make it unclear by asking questions. And there are questions. And when I was working through this text this week, I imagined what are some of the questions that the crowd, the audience, the disciples would have asked of Jesus at this point. You might have some questions too. What are these questions? Well, I have a few that I thought of. Is this an individual ethic only? Is it just for like when Derek and I are at odds, but it doesn't apply to larger groups of people or nations, humans in general? That's a question we can ask. I don't know what your answer is. I'm not sure what mine is either. I have some viewpoints and opinions. I think Jesus, it's pretty clear, was about nonviolent resistance, not pacifism. He believed in resisting and going up against Rome, for example, but doing so in a nonviolent way. I remember hearing someone, Dale C. Allison Jr., I think it was, one of the great New Testament scholars living today. He was telling a story about a guy that he knew who was a pacifist. And it's a sin to cause harm to anyone for any reason at all, and especially to kill them. And he said, this guy was asked, well, what about even if someone breaks into your home in the middle of the night and your wife and your children are there, they're sleeping, what about then? What about trying to defend yourself? And no, the answer of the pacifist is that that's a sin to protect yourself and your family and to kill someone. And then the guy was asked straight up, like, okay, what if that happens to you? What if someone comes into your house tonight and your wife and your children are in grave danger? What would you do? He said, well, I would kill him and then ask for forgiveness later. That's very honest, right? He's convinced, he's convicted about what is a sin, and he knows it's wrong, but he still knows that he would violate his conscience in that situation. I'm not saying that his view of pacifism is right, or his views on those situations. I'm just saying that he admits out loud, I have a belief, I have a view, I know what I'm convinced of as being right, and I am willing to do the opposite sometimes and ask for forgiveness later. It's just honesty. And we ought to be honest with ourselves too when it comes to this text and how often we violate our conscience when it comes to what Jesus says here. So is this an individual ethic? Is it about larger groups of people treating other larger groups of people or even nations? I don't know. But there was a really insightful. Let's start applying it to war and nations for a second. I'm not going to do this for long. And this is not a political statement. It's about. I watched a documentary on Netflix, and it's new. It's called Surviving Black Hawk Down. Really, really good documentary, but not if you have you have to have a good stomach for it because it's tough imagery and that sort of thing. But they're interviewing. This is talking about in 1993 in Somalia and Mogadishu and the incident, the context of what happened there that day with the United States military and the Somalis there and that sort of thing. Yeah, you might remember that story. But anyway, one of their Black Hawk helicopters was shot down, and the documentary is interviewing like pilots. Most of these were Rangers and Delta Force people who are on this mission, and one of the guys was in that helicopter that was shot down, and they ended up surviving and then finding shelter in this house right in the area there, taking fire from the enemy in this house in which innocent Somali family was hiding, cowering, trying to remain safe. And the guy that's interviewed, he says he starts, they were there for hours and hours trying to fend off the enemy. And he says he began to look at this family and feel sympathy for them, feel sorry about what's happening to them in this context. And then he breaks a little bit, and a little emotion comes out. And he said, that's what makes it hard. In this quote he says, don't add humanity to war. When you add humanity to war, it complicates things. Pure honesty. Again, not a comment either way. But I just thought that's such an insightful comment. Don't add humanity to war. When we have enemies, as a nation, as a smaller group of people, as individuals, the way that enemy label is maintained is by making sure that humanity doesn't enter the equation. As soon as you let humanity enter into our war, then things get complicated. So is this an individual ethic? I don't know. But it's the same principle, no matter how big or small we're taking this. That an enemy is an enemy because humanity is not there. Another question, what about God? Does he not have to do this stuff? Right? Didn't we just, God has enemies, and he, it kind of seems like we're not allowed to do that stuff, but God is. What about that? I was talking with my friend Shane on the phone last night and brought up this question to him. And Shane's never wrong, and so just wanted to know what he thought about it. One of the things he said was, God, and by extension Jesus, are the only ones who know how to do this the right way, who know how to execute justice and judgment in a fully pure and holy and right way. There's a reason why the text says, God says, "Vengeance is mine," declares the Lord. Humans don't know how to do vengeance very well. We overdo it. We don't know how to do it well. But God does. That's one of the things Shane said. Jesus does. And right before this, Jesus is saying, "Woe to these people, woe to that." He's woeing the enemies. Isn't that interesting? That's another question I have. How come Jesus can say, "Woe to the enemies," and then say, "Love your enemy and bless them"? What does that mean? How does that work? I think there's a difference there. Woe, it can be a lament. We say, "Woe is me," lamenting a bad situation. Obviously, it's also a pronouncement of judgment to come. And those things are true. He's saying what's true about these people who hoard and are selfish and have no care for the rich, or for the poor, and the hungry, and that sort of thing. It's a simple statement. And I think Jesus says we're allowed to make those observations. If it's true, it's true. And by the way, you don't have to stay in that category forever. You can move out of that category into another one if you want. But who is my enemy? That's the last question I had. Who then is my enemy? This is a question that we heard introduced also by David Tucker today. Who is my enemy? Well, we have, like I said, enemies that who are out to get us, or we're out to get them. And maybe at work or at school, or maybe in our own families, neighbors, that sort of thing. But I'll tell you, there's a history of theological enemies, right? Very easy to create an enemy based on disagreement, different ideas, different ideologies. Now that's kind of going by the wayside, and taking its place is political differences. Sorry to bring up politics again. But politics is probably the thing that divides people the most today. And it's very difficult to navigate those waters for us now. Political polarization. There's a lot of money in that. If you find yourself getting worked up about different views or different ideologies, someone's probably making money off of your emotions. And when did this all begin? Some say 10 years ago or whatever. Some say in the 1960s. Some say in the year 1800. It used to be that the person who gets the most votes becomes the president of the United States, and the person who got the second most votes becomes the vice president of the United States. And it used to be that those two people would have to sit down together and work together with totally opposing views. How in the world, we can't even imagine what that would be like now. Right? But Jesus knows this secret. Our country couldn't even handle it. That lasted for like 12 years, and then, but Jesus knows the secret of what it means to sit down at a table and have to be face to face with your enemy, with someone who has deeply different views than you. And isn't that exactly what happens at this table every day? The secret is, if we can just get to a point where we're willing to sit or stand around a table and look at each other, do you know what happens? We begin to rally around something else, not a common enemy, but a common Savior. We disagree on a lot of other stuff, but we agree on the most important thing: Jesus. That is what this table is about. You know that there are different political views, different theological views in this room, and I can't remember the last time any of that mattered in this room, mattered around that table to any of us. Because we look into each other's eyes and we love them as Christ loves. That's the beauty, that's the power of the gospel. And at this table, we're also remembering this verse. Verse 31, the golden rule: treat others the same as you want them to treat you. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Why does Jesus say that? Because sometimes I'm the enemy. Bear in mind that sometimes I'm the enemy. I live life saying that my enemies are out here, I'm good, I'm perfect, everything is well. Sometimes I'm the enemy. And I better remember that when I treat other people certain ways. I'll treat them the way I would want to be treated when I'm an enemy. I know what I deserve, what I might deserve if I'm an enemy and I've wronged someone. And I know what I want as well. I would want mercy. Which is why Jesus says at the end of this section, be merciful. Be merciful just as your Father is merciful. How has God been merciful to me? Paul has no problem saying that we were once of this category of enemy in relation to God. You were enemies. But now, God has done something. God has been merciful. God has forgiven. That's the only way that this world works, through mercy. But what does that look like? Okay, I'll just go around and say, I'll just, wear a t-shirt, I'm merciful today or something. Well, he says right at the beginning, here's what mercy looks like. Here's what the mercy of God looks like, even towards his enemies. This is another part of that conversation with Shane. Do you know how God treats his enemies? How? Oh, what does it say? Let's see here. He says that I was reading the wrong verse. Sorry. If you do good, this is verse 33. If you do good to those who do good, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners in order to receive back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in your return. And your reward will be great, and you will be sons of the Most High, for he himself is kind to ungrateful and evil men. He himself is kind to ungrateful and evil people. I don't know if I am that way. To my enemies? To evil people? How in the world does that work? Well, here are some things that Jesus says, 4 or 5 of them. I say to those of you who hear, this is verse 27, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. What if that was just the checklist? Love. What's one way that I can love my enemy today? Name one easy thing. Just do that every day. Do good. How can I do something good for a person who hates me? Think of one idea. It's pretty easy. It's the same stuff you do. How do I love my wife or my best friend? What things do I do to love them? Well, do one of those to your enemy. How do I do good to my wife or my best friend? Okay, well, just pick one of those things and do it to someone that hates you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. Praying is dangerous. I tell you, you got to be careful with this one, because the more you pray about someone, the more you bring humanity into the equation. It's dangerous. You might lose an enemy if you start praying for them. So be careful. In fact, all of these interject humanity. They put us face to face with an enemy, just like being around the table. How are you going to do good to someone or bless them or love them except by interacting with them, seeing their humanity, seeing them face to face? This is what mercy is about. Mercy is injecting humanity into the equation and looking someone face to face around a table and saying, you too are human. You too are in the image of God. And we have huge differences, vast. But I'm going to love. I'm going to do good. I'm going to bless. I'm going to pray for you. That's hacking the system of vengeance and enemies that we're so good at today. So central to our existence. But as one person says, once you know the game, you don't have to play it anymore. Once we understand that people make money off of us being politically polarized, or polarized in other ways, theologically, whatever, once we realize that it is in people's best interests that we remain that way, and we see that game, we don't have to play it anymore. Once we realize the game that we are as humans, that built into us is the need, the drive to have enemies, because it helps us in some way. Once we understand that about ourselves, that game, then we don't have to play it anymore. We can become something else. We can become like Jesus, and that's exactly what he's calling his disciples and us to do. What if we stop playing the games that humans play and start operating under the ethic of the cross in the kingdom of God? What would this world look like? It would look a lot like what we saw today around this table. It would look a lot like what we saw today around this table. Let's never give up on doing that each week. I want to end with a short poem. This is by a guy named John Keane. This is a part of the poem, all right? It's about love. Love every time. Love your enemies. Love the enemies of your enemies. Love those whose very idea of love is hate. Love the liars and the fakes. Love the tattletales and the hypocrites and the hucksters and the traitors. Love the thieves, because everyone has thought of stealing something at least once. Love the rich who live only to empty your purse or wallet. Love the poverty of your empty coin purse or wallet. Love yourself, but not too much that you can't love everything and anyone else. Love everywhere. Love in the absence of love. Love the monsters breeding in every corner of the city and suburb, all throughout the soil of the countryside. Love the monster breeding inside you and slaughter him with love. Love the shipwreck of your body, your mind's salted garden. Love, love. Let's stand and sing.